Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to be with Dr. Nadine Macaluso. She is the author of Run Like Hell, and she has a nickname that has come, it's been a part of her whole life, but it really became prominent in a movie, Wolf of Wall Street, and that is the Duchess of Bay Ridge. So, Nadine, thanks so much for being on today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm glad we could make this happen.
Yes. So to start your story, you grew up in New York with a single mom, and you talked about how money just wasn't a plentiful thing in your household. So talk a little bit about the early years of kind of growing up in that single parent household.
Sure, yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn in the 70s, which, I always say it was a fun time. There was no
Yeah.
internet, there were no, right, smartphones, and everybody was playing out on the streets. But I was raised by a single mom, which, any single moms out there know that it's a struggle, right, to support children and yourself on one income.
Yeah.
But she was very interested in psychology and Freud and Jung. So those seeds of psychology were planted into me from a very young age. But it was a very, charmed childhood, pretty uneventful, actually. I mean, my parents did get divorced when I was young, but that wasn't a big drama at all.
Yeah.
That was very amicable. They went on their ways, and that was that.
So as you're growing up, there becomes a point in time where you're like, I need to start making some money, and modeling becomes an avenue for you. So talk a little bit about maybe that just, yearning or desire to go make some money and then pursuing the
Yeah.
modeling world.
Well, yeah, I think as children, we don't really understand what money does or the
Yeah.
power of it. And as I was getting older and, being adjacent to New York City, right, where there's a lot of money
Yeah.
flowing around, and I was like, oh, this is a thing that I really need to have to live. And I better figure out a way to make it because I did not come from a house where, my parents were just going to hand it over to me.
Yeah.
And so that just seems like a very viable way for me to make money. And so my mom was against it because she was obsessed with me getting educated. But I was like, you know what? You're not going to buy me a car, so I'm going to go do this.
Yeah. Now, talk a little bit about that because that is a tough industry to get into. It's a tough industry to stay into, and connections can be paramount. And if you don't come from, a modeling background, how do you even get a foot in the door? And someone today listening may not be able to resonate with going into modeling, but they might be trying to, enter into an industry or a new
Yeah,
circle. And I think some of those skills can be transcending.
sure. Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, you have to have courage because, you have to have courage to go to an agency and, you get rejected by tons of them. That's the big part of the modeling industry. But there was an agency called Elite Petite back then, and I'm 5'7". So they took me on. And modeling was brutal. It's a little different now with the internet, but we'd have to go on they would call go sees and show up and present your best self and then wait to be chosen. So you definitely had to have thick skin to do that or develop it at least.
Yes, absolutely. Now, as you're, entering into that industry, you start to make different connections and whatnot. And so there becomes a point in time where you get invited to a house party and you decide to go. So talk a little bit about, going to that party and just your, social circle as it's starting to expand in your, kind of professional career.
Yeah, so I was running around the city modeling, having a great time. And my boyfriend at the time, as the movie The Wolf of Wall Street depicts, says, you know what? Let's go to this party at this big house on Dune Road on the beach. And so we show up to the house, and hence, Jordan Belfort's having a party there. Now I walk in, and everybody seems weird to me, but I didn't know they're like quaaludes because I didn't know what a quaalude was. And and we went, and as the movie depicts, someone did expose themselves to me. So I wanted to leave right away because I felt very embarrassed and ashamed. And we left. But I guess I must have made an impression on the wolf.
So once again, to your point, in the movie, right, it speeds things up. But in your actual personal life, you're pursuing this modeling career. So you're traveling, and I think you end up going to Chicago for a period of time. And so
Yes. Yeah.
you're working. But talk a little bit about how the relationship then comes to be, as you're pursuing your career still, right? It's not like, oh, you were so infatuated that tomorrow you just
No, 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 no.
cut off and went that way. You were still pursuing your career, but talk a little bit about that kind of transitioning time for you.
Yeah, so I met him, and what had happened was that I didn't even think twice about him. I just left the party, felt a little weird, but went upon my way. Like you say, went back to work.
Yeah.
And then a woman, a mutual friend, said, I'd like to go out to dinner with you. And I said, okay. And she kept calling me. I thought it was strange. And then she said, that guy Jordan's going to come. And I said, that's weird. Why is he coming? Isn't he married?
Yeah.
Now, I had no idea this whole thing was set up and manipulated from behind the scenes. And she said, yes, he is. But what do you care? I said, I don't care. I just think it's strange. And so that was the first time that we met. It was a total setup, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah. Now, for you guys and just kind of looking at career and entering into a relationship, sometimes certain sacrifices have to be made, right? And so for you, you're pursuing your own modeling career, right? And you're having success in New York, Chicago, right? And all over.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to find a point in time where you were wanting to kind of maybe transition out from being in the modeling space and more into the relationship and motherly aspects, or what was that like for you?
Well, it was different for me in that sense, in that when I met then Jordan and I about 6 months later met again, and that's when our relationship really blossomed
Mm.
and bloomed. And my money compared to his money seems silly, I
Yeah.
guess, right? And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I got to go to work today. I'm going to make $3,000. He's like, oh, that's nothing. Stay home. And so that was like an experience of somebody saying to me, don't do this, like kind of being
Mm.
controlling, right?
Yeah.
Coercive, controlling with me. And I was like, oh, okay. I like to work. Clearly, you don't get your doctorate if you don't like to work, right?
Right.
I like to work. I like to be productive, but I said, okay, I'm not going to work. And that was definitely felt strange. But at that time, it felt like, oh, he's taking care of me.
Mm. Yes. So it's tough to tell this story because we're years in advance now and we're reflecting on it. But, you had mentioned after having been able to reflect on it, there were certain things that as your relationship was progressing started to seem, to your point, kind of like controlling and, hey, are we going to get married or when are we going to have kids? And so talk a little
Right.
bit about like from a perspective of in the moment, did it just feel like, oh, he really loves me and he's just really excited
Yes.
about this? And then in hindsight, you start to connect some of those dots of maybe what the unintended consequence of
Yeah,
that was.
in the moment when he was really pushing for marriage and for children, I felt resistant to it only because I was so young.
Mm.
Not because I love being a mother. I always wanted to be a mother. It wasn't
Yeah.
that, but it didn't, it felt like those choices were getting taken from me, right?
Yeah.
But in the moment, I was like, yeah, oh, you know what? Nadine, let it go. He just must love you.
So as you guys are progressing and growing in the relationship, to your point, money is plentiful, right? We get to see that, doing very well successfully in the business and the career. Talk about a few of the fun just events that you guys got to do or trips you took or things that you most vividly
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, initially, when we first met and we got engaged, this doesn't even exist anymore. We took the Concorde to London. And
Yeah.
that was a pretty fun experience, right? To take the
Yeah.
supersonic plane to London, and then we went to the south of France. And the good times were we were always with all of our friends
Mm.
having parties, and we were young.
Yeah.
So that was like definitely a lot of fun till it wasn't.
Yeah. So,
Till it
so
wasn't, till it got
yeah.
out of balance.
Yeah, well, and so in that regard, you've kind of talked about, hey, there, and I think this can be true for so many things, right? You can really enjoy something, and then sometimes really enjoy turns into a problem.
Cool.
And, you started to be able to notice that with partying habits and things of that nature. And so, what's something that a person listening, hey, maybe I'm not sure where I fall anymore, right? I thought it used to just be a fun piece, but now I'm starting to realize that it's more habitual or consistent, or I'm going to it in these instances because it's, helping me deal with it as a coping mechanism. What would be some advice to someone that's maybe flirting in between that, or someone listening that feels like their significant other is in that season, to help them kind of decide or move out of that?
I think when substances, drugs or alcohol really start to become a problem at work or in your relationships, right? Like Freud
Mm,
said, those are two aspects of our lives that are super
yeah,
important, then you really need to look at that. And is it really interfering with the quality of your relationships? Is it interfering with you reaching your potential and work?
yeah,
And if it is, I always say either we figure out our relationship with substances and food, or it's gonna, right? Like we have to figure that out
yeah,
because, or it'll figure it out with us and it won't be pretty.
right. No, that's very good. Now, as you guys are progressing in your relationship, once again, have kids and whatnot, and at some point you end up deciding, I'm going to go to therapy and start experiencing that, and it's helpful for you. So talk a little bit about, what you were learning in therapy and what was starting to, open your eyes or help you out.
Yeah, so when I first initially in my relationship with Jordan, it just was so large and it was so much so soon. And I
Yeah.
didn't understand, how do I manage an estate and a staff and him,
Yeah.
right? So because I had to have those psychological seeds planted, I said, you know what, I got to get into therapy. And so I got myself into therapy, and therapy was just a wonderful non-judgmental space where I could go and learn how to manage this new madness that was now my life.
Yeah. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but today I think people are talking about it more frequently. So it's starting to become this topic that isn't hush hush. It's, hey, yeah, that's a
Correct.
good thing. Whereas I feel like 20, 30, years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. It was, oh man, something must be really wrong if, you're pursuing someone's help in therapy. Did you ever feel like that was something you couldn't really talk with friends about, or was that something that you even just felt very comfortable with discussing at that point
Yeah,
in time?
I felt very comfortable discussing it, but again, because of the way I was raised,
Yeah,
right? There wasn't a stigma attached to it for me. So I
yeah,
did feel very, very comfortable.
no, absolutely. Now,
Hence, I became a therapist.
I say in full circle, she becomes a therapist. Yes.
Yeah.
So as you're working through, your guys' relationship, and business is going really well. Once again, if you've watched the movie, you know that eventually business isn't going really well. And so I think, talking about maybe the dynamic shift even in your guys' relationship from when business was really good to then as business, started to change. And
Started to change.
yeah,
Yeah, I think, and I really can't speak for Jordan, but I think that as he was taken out of the business and he wasn't as involved, right? I'm sure that had to affect his ego, I would imagine,
yeah,
right? And, and he wasn't also going to work anymore, right? So you have a lot more free time. And that's really when the drug addiction started to get more intense.
yeah. Well, and I think that's a tough thing as people, right? We try and associate who we are with something, right? And that could be as a
Correct.
parent, it could be as a spouse, it could be as a
Yes.
business owner,
Yes.
whatever it is that we maybe have derived our confidence from. So, what are some things that people can do to not necessarily attach their identity and self-worth in things that aren't guaranteed to be there for forever?
Yeah, I think especially for men, it's hard. I think that a man's ego is a lot more attached to work than women's, and and what he can produce. And I actually have a lot of empathy for men in regards to that. And we do have different roles as parent, wife, mother, businesswoman, therapist. But at the end of the day, we're just simply human beings on the planet that are imperfect, that make mistakes, and just trying to make our way through. Now, those
Yeah.
are jobs that we take on, but we're really, that's just simply who we are. And so we're more than our work for sure, right?
Yeah.
And to keep that in mind.
Yep. That's good. Now, as many people have said, right? They say you can have all the money in the world. It doesn't make you happy, right? It can buy you fun events, it can do amazing things for you, but it doesn't give you your happiness. And as the transition starts to happen, I think you probably have realized this probably earlier than when the divorce is coming about. But just talk about kind of that season of, hey, we have all the possessions, right? We have all the ability to do things. But I don't feel like the marriage is really long term what I'm thinking.
Right. I think that, in our consumers culture, right, we're taught that things and homes and these big toys can fulfill us inside, and they
Yeah.
can. And listen, do we need money for security in this world? For sure. Are nice things fun for a moment? Yes. But they do not really make a life.
Mm.
And they're
Yeah.
not enough to sustain a marriage if the marriage isn't going well.
Yeah. Now, as the divorce is coming to be, I I've heard you in interviews talk about the timing doesn't look good in regards to, oh, it was after, these things have happened. But there is a great point that you made, and you said, but the reality is after the arrest, I felt like there was a safety blanket for me to be
Yes.
able to make this choice. So talk a little bit about maybe some of the, if people gave you backlash for it, at the timing of things, and
Yeah.
then also the reality of the situation for you.
Yeah, at the time, nobody really gave me any backlash because I think people that are around me had seen what I had endured, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but now, in the current zeitgeist, with the movie coming out, and then, even though it's been 10 years, and me coming and speaking out about my experience, a lot of that talk has been, oh, you left him when he lost everything. And that's simply not true. I left him because he was verbally and emotionally and physically abusive to me. And then finally, I did feel safe enough because he got an ankle bracelet. And I was like, okay, he can't hurt me now that the government is watching him. Of
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that it took to that event, right, to be
course. Yeah.
comfortable, but at the same token, there's
Yes.
an element of additional safety that, to your point, you now know if someone's watching.
Yeah, and I just felt safe. My kids couldn't be taken from me. I think that's always every mother's worry, right? And it was just very obvious, like who we both were. And, I didn't wish him any harm. I just wanted to take great care of our kids and feel safe.
Yeah. Now, in your time just being, the significant other of Jordan, right, the wife of Jordan, and running a business, I think that's such an interesting dynamic of you're not necessarily day to day in the business, but there's a lot of obligations that a wife of a business owner or
Sure.
a spouse of a
Sure.
business owner is entitled to. So talk a little about that role in the relationship and just, being at events and, maybe it's
Yeah,
entertaining other significant others and things like
yeah,
that.
that role I really love because I um I love to decorate, I love to cook, I love to entertain. So, I'm naturally an introvert.
Mm,
I recharge by reading and writing and those things, but I do love people and I'm very
yeah.
relational. So for me, that was fine.
Yeah.
I didn't mind doing any of that.
So talk a little bit about that. And once again, Jordan much better than the majority of humans, but
Yeah.
from perspective, it would seem like he's probably a relatively extroverted person.
Very, yeah,
Uh,
he's very extroverted, yes.
so in relationships, I think that can cause dysfunction or it can cause problems if one person's very introverted and one's very
Right.
extroverted. So talk a little bit about ways for people to handle that in their relationships, hey, as the extrovert, things that maybe you would need to do to, help the introvert and vice versa, things as an introvert that
Yeah,
you might have to concede to appease the extrovert.
sure, sure. I talk about love in this way. Love
Yeah.
has two qualities. the quality of connection. And then you also have to give your partner space to be who they are.
Mm,
So we have to respect if somebody's an introvert or an extrovert. And if that means, going out with them
yeah,
more than maybe you would want to, or if that means staying in sometimes, right? Or giving people the space to do their own thing separately.
yeah,
That's really important part of that compromise in a relationship, but understanding that your partner is different than you, and that's okay.
yeah. I love it. Now, I think, as you talk about that, finding what your role is, but then communicating, right? And I think that can be the stick in the mud for a lot of people is,
Yes.
well, I really want to go do this. Nadine's not telling me that, hey, this is just draining me. And it's just, no, I don't want to do it. And you start to have that rub between, the two people
Correct.
in the couple.
Correct. You have to, your partner's not a mind reader, they're not Houdini. You have to ask for your needs to get met.
Yes, I love it. So, what ends up being kind of the catalyst? Once again, no divorce is ever based on a singular event. There's, a series of things that
Yeah.
have led to it. But what ends up being kind of the catalyst of, I can't take it anymore. This is, the route that we're needing to go down.
Yeah, I think that it was, years of build up of the coercive control and his drug addiction, right? It really wore on me over time.
Yeah.
And his arrest did, give me the freedom. And also I never really felt full remorse from him.
Mm,
And so really if you don't if you don't receive that from somebody, it's very hard to have resolution.
yeah.
And so I couldn't stay anymore.
Yep. Understood. So as you're going through this, you end up uh, starting your own business post the divorce. So talk a little bit about the idea behind the business and kind of the beginnings of that.
The which business? This business today?
The maternity
Oh,
clothing
no,
company
sorry.
that you
Yeah.
started. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was that I was pregnant and I just was like, I'm not wearing these maternity clothes. And this was, many years ago. Maternity clothes were terrible. And so a woman who had made clothes for me, I just said, hey, you want to go into business? And we started a business literally out of my basement. And we built a website and a store and a catalog. And it was really good because it gave me confidence outside of my relationship
Yeah.
because it forced me to learn new things and face fears about not knowing stuff, but then like overcoming it by learning. And
Yeah.
so I think it was very important for me to have as I exited.
I want to highlight what you just said, and that is it forced me to learn new things. I think so frequently people feel like they need to make this radical change in their life because they've just become mundane or kind of blah. And the reality is, one thing that I found for me is if I'm just giving myself something new to pursue, right? It could be a new workout goal, it could be a new, I want to learn this. It just invigorates me and it gets me excited about even some of the more mundane things in my life because I've got that new something. So talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that element.
Yeah, Jordan even makes fun of me in the book about this. That, and like in the movie too, like you 1 week you're an interior designer, 1 week you're learning about to cook, 1 week. I just like to learn.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we approach something that we don't know and then we somewhat master it, and I'm not talking like I didn't become Julia Child, or Martha Stewart, but
Yeah.
we master it, then we build confidence.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
it gives us true self-esteem and confidence. And I'm just a curious creature. I like to learn.
Yeah. Now, as you're going through the divorce, and you don't have to disclose specific financials, but I would imagine there's probably a very significant financial change for you and the kids at that point
Yes.
in time. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about that because it's interesting, right? You grew up in a household where didn't have, right, a whole lot of wealth, a single family.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, we have this meteoric rise to unprecedented wealth, and then we come back. So talk a little about was it sad? Was it humbling? Was it, hey, I've been there before. I know I can get out of, talk a little bit about just where your
Right.
mindset was at that
Yeah,
moment in time.
it was certainly humbling,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But also at that point, I just didn't care about the money.
Yeah.
I mean, I was afraid, of course, of, with two little babies and how to support them, but
Yeah.
the money had become so tainted and it just didn't feel right.
Mm,
So I was very happy to release it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as you're in New York, you end up deciding to move across the country to California. And there's a specific reason for that. It wasn't just one day you picked California, but talk a little bit about how the transition from New York to California came about.
Yeah, so I met a lovely man who's still my husband. We're together 25 years, actually June 9th.
Woo!
Yeah, and I met him and he was also in the garment business. So we were both in the garment business. He had three children. I had two, the same ages. We fell in love and he lived in California. And
Mm,
I just, thought with my home's being taken and my kids didn't need to deal with the stigma and the legacy
yeah.
of what had gone down here in Long Island. And so we picked up and moved and started all over. And then Jordan did eventually follow us there.
Yes. So as you're in California, you decide that, hey, I want to keep pursuing, this psychology piece and counseling and therapy and learning about it. So you start getting degrees in that. And then talk a little bit about, going to school and, kind of reinvigorating yourself in the education system. You've been out, right? For
Oh,
a
yeah.
while.
I was out for a long time, 17, 27. I was out for 22 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I love to learn. And
Yeah.
I was in California and I knew that the fashion industry is too trendy to
Mm,
really grow older in it. And
yeah.
I just thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to school and become a therapist.
Yeah.
And I did it. I actually had a year and a half of my undergrad to finish. So I did that. And then I got my master's and then got my doctorate. I just kind of went for it because I loved it so much. And you have to get 3,000 hours of clinical work to be a
Yeah.
licensed therapist. So I
Yeah.
figured I might as well just stay in school. Yeah.
That's
So,
right.
that's the amazing part. You can get, that's my third career now, right? By the time I'm 39.
Well, so I want to ask you about that because I think so frequently, someone's done something for 10 years and they go, gosh, I'm too old to make a switch, right? Or, I'm too stuck in this career to want to make the change. And don't get me wrong, there's certain scary things that come from it, right? You're giving up
Of
income
course,
or
of
what if
course.
it doesn't work out, right? The doubt, the fear, that all creeps in. But talk a little about making that pivot for you, right? Because once again, fashion into counseling, right? It was something that was important to you, but it's still a
Yeah.
big jump. So talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
it was a big jump for sure. But again, like I said, I had been in therapy, so I knew how helpful therapy was to me.
Yeah,
And I know that therapy works. It's not a solve for everything, but it does help us grow and I think become better versions of ourselves. So it seems like a big jump because fashion and therapy really have nothing in common. But for me, in my own personal life, I was always reading spiritual books or therapy
yeah,
books. That therapy, that psychological seeds never left me.
yeah.
So it was always in there waiting to be born, I think.
I love it. Now, inside of, the time frame of this, while you're getting your doctorate is when, if I understand correctly, the movie comes out.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's nothing like starting your business when a movie about, your life is coming out.
Yeah, good old JB. Yeah, he has good timing. So, yes, that was when the movie was coming out. It was right as I was finishing my doctorate. I already had my practice because I had my master's, right?
Right.
I already had my practice, and I just was like, dear Lord. I mean, of course, I was anxious and nervous, and I thought, who's going to want to come to me as a therapist?
Hmm.
You know, I mean, look at my life. It just looks like a madhouse, and it was. But
Yeah.
the opposite happens, and
Yes.
people said, "Hey, you went through this. You've come out the other side. I do want to come see you." And not that when I first started my practice, and when the movie came out, I never even spoke about The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
Only till many, many years later that I did.
Well, and I think that's such an interesting piece of life, right? We can have something that we try and bury and hide that we just
Yeah,
don't want people to know about. And at
right.
the same token, so frequently, that is the exact thing that qualifies us to go help other people.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. And, and I just really never had it like, oh my God, wait, I'm going to, now like the Wolf of Wall. I wish I had some great plan that like the Wolf of Wall Street's going to come out. And that's going to inspire me to help women and I'm going to write a book. There was no
Yeah.
plan. I
Yeah.
just like as life evolved and I had my practice and the movie came out and then I saw this need for women.
Yeah.
Then I decided to do more research and write my book.
So let's talk and jump into your book. And I guess maybe even, I don't even know what your doctoral thesis is on. Maybe that correlates to the book. Maybe it's very different, but talk a little bit about what the premise of the book is. And once again, the real focus that you have in your practice today.
Yeah, so the premise, so the name of my book is Run Like Hell, a therapist's guide to recognizing, escaping, and healing from trauma bonds. And
Yeah.
so what happens in my practice, I saw a lot of women in toxic relationships that were being coercively controlled, that were being lied to, financially abused, betrayed. And so I said, you know what? Let me try to figure out a little bit what's happening here.
Yeah.
And I remember, when I left my trauma bond, which wasn't even a word back then, nobody was talking about narcissism. I felt really lost and I felt a
Yeah.
lot of shame. And so I really write my book to destigmatize these toxic relationships and explain them in a very relatable way.
Yes. Now, something that I've heard you speak a little bit on, and you'll be able to articulate it much better than I can, is, that term narcissist has grown in popularity in the last seemingly 5 years for whatever reason. And it's almost like almost too many things get categorized as that now. And you distinctly kind of differentiate trauma bond versus, that. So talk a little about
Yeah.
maybe the differential between those two things.
Yeah, everybody's called a narcissist nowadays. And, and I understand the reasoning for that because people with personality disorders really hurt the people that love them.
Yeah.
Right? So I understand the need to do that, but a trauma bond is much more complex. And the pathological person or the perpetrator in the trauma bond is much more than a narcissist. They
Mm.
can have an impulsive disorder, they can have compulsive, they can have substance abuse disorder, right?
Yeah.
They can have many different pieces to their personality. So, I know we like to simplify and I understand, but it is much deeper than just throwing a label on it.
Yeah. Yep. That's good. Now, for you in working with as many people as you have in relationships, all right, somebody's in a relationship and trust has been broken. What are steps that people can take to rebuild trust or regain trust? And once again, I think sometimes the tough thing is it's a two-way street, right? The person that's broken the trust has to do things to regain it, but the other person has to be willing to allow those to mend the
Yeah.
relationship, right? So talk a little about those types of situations.
Yeah, so betrayal is so painful.
Mm.
When you believe you can trust somebody and they've made a promise to you. It's one
Yeah.
thing if somebody says, hey, you can't trust me, but this is how I want to live our lives, with an open relationship. That's very different than presenting that you can be trusted and then betraying your partner. And so when I do work with couples, because I still do sometimes, the one who has betrayed, right, has to be willing to really make amends to the partner that they hurt. And when that partner reacts as they will, the betrayer needs to receive the pain.
Mm.
If they can really receive the pain, internalize it, not dismiss it, and have remorse, the couple can grow. But that's a really important piece that has to happen.
Absolutely. Now, what about someone that's listening and they say, I'm past that, right? We've tried it, it's just not working, but I'm still kind of stuck in this relationship dynamic. What would be some thoughts or feedback for them on, hey, here are steps that you can take to either give it the one last shot if you're still okay with that, or here's how to potentially start moving on.
Yeah, if your partner really doesn't have remorse or can't receive your pain and you want to leave, every situation is very different. If you're married, of course, like document everything, get a good divorce attorney, right? No matter who you are, get into therapy
Yeah.
because you're going to need support.
Yeah.
And
Now,
it,
as couples are, yeah, well, now as people are in therapy, if from your perspective, is it best to have a person go to therapy by themselves? Is it better to go as couples? Is it, hey, you should be doing both? What are good steps or ways to kind of figure out what people should be doing in relationships?
if you have a partner that's willing to go to couples therapy, I totally suggest it,
Yeah.
it's I've helped a lot of couples, and even if it doesn't help the relationship stay together, it can often help the relationship dissolve much more amicably and much safer.
Yeah.
Um, so I highly recommend it.
Now, you've been married 25 years, which is an amazing amount of time. So, talk a little bit about things that have been really important for you in your relationship that you think, man, this has certainly helped us in our 25 years. What are maybe one or two tangible things that you and your husband do to, just continue to have a successful relationship?
You know, but I think one of the first things that we do is we can hear each other.
Mm,
I always say if someone can't hear you, they can't love you.
wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, we really will be able to hear each other and kind of take whatever like feedback we get and then change,
Yeah.
make changes for each other. And it's very messy, it's very imperfect, but and we've also forced each other to grow in different ways. I think I've forced his emotional growth, he's forced my career growth. So we've
Yeah.
been good influences on each other in that way. And we genuinely love family.
Mm, that's really good.
It's a good share.
Now, yes. Now, for you, once again, you've overcome so many difficult things, but one thing in your personal life is cancer. And so talk a little bit about that season of life for you and just overcoming that.
Yeah, that's never a fun diagnosis to get, for sure. And that point, I really leaned into my spirituality.
Mm,
I think that really helped me get through that. And of course, having loving people around me,
yeah.
I'm so blessed in that way.
Mm. Well, talk about relationships and just having a circle. I think oftentimes as our careers change, as our, worlds change, as we geographically move, relationships can come and go. What does that look like for you today? Do you have many friends from the New York days? Is it a lot of people from
Yes.
the California days? Talk about how
Yes, I
you kind
have.
of maintain
Yeah.
relationships there.
Relationships are really but what I value so much in my life.
Yeah.
They make life worth living. I mean, if we're not connected to people, really, what's the point of being here? And so I have my best friends since I'm six from Brooklyn. I have friends from high school, from college, from when I lived in LA. I'm back in New York. I have, my best friend from when I first met Jordan, her husband worked for Stratton Oakmont. We're friends for over 30 years. So yeah, friendships are so important. And again, relationships to me are everything. Hence why I'm a therapist. I'm
Yeah.
trying to always teach people how to have healthy relationships because as necessary as they are, they're complicated and we're not taught how to do it.
Yeah. That's really good. Now, this just came to me as you were talking. So,
Yes.
you know, I think from tying relationships and just your kind of life trajectory, so many times you find as the friend of the person in the relationship, you see things differently because you're not as emotionally tied to the relationship, right? As the person in it.
That's correct.
At the same token, it's really hard to how do you bring up the conversation with them? Like, hey, I just don't think this is a good fit, because you don't want to tarnish the friendship. Right. At the same token, you don't want them to wake up 5 years down the road and realize it and be like, why didn't you tell me? And you go, well, you seemed happy. So, how, as a friend on the outside, if you're seeing people in a relational dynamic, do you even bring up the topic in such a way that, I'm not poo-pooing your relationship, but I'm also not going to be the friend that 5 years from now you're like, why didn't you tell me sooner?
Yeah, I think that that is a very, very slippery slope because a
Yeah.
lot of times, right, your friends will complain to you about the relationship and then it's fine. And then you're like, but wait, I thought you weren't in love with him anymore. Right. So
Yeah.
you're not in the relationship, and that's the
Yeah.
bottom line. And I think, if you see a friend that's in danger, really unsafe, or if you see a real consistent pattern that your
Yeah.
friend keeps bringing up to you, you can simply say to them, you know, do you want me just to listen?
Yeah.
Do you want me to offer advice? Do you want me just to hold space? What you're telling me something. What do you need from me right now?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something that, even the person being in a relationship, it's a good thing to remember. Grant Cardone's wife talks about this, how she goes, I rarely will go complain to my friends when my husband does something that upsets me, because they will hold on to that, right? Like, I can forgive him for what he's done and I can
Yes,
move on from it. But
yes,
unfortunately, my friends will hold that and they'll be like, ugh, and it might even be subconsciously they feel that way, right? But they'll remember it. So she goes, I'm very strategic about what I do and don't talk about, because I don't want to say something that I'm heated about, say it to a friend, and then they're going to hold on to something that I know in a week from now I'll probably be able to forgive and move on from.
correct, correct. I understand, that reasoning. That's why you go talk to your therapist,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's why you go talk to your therapist, because they're trained to hold that, like I say to I say this to my patients, 1 week you come in, you hate him, 1 week you come in, you love him, I go with you,
Mm,
right?
yeah. Yep.
'Cause we're on this exploration together again, unless it's, a safety issue. But that's very normal. We all do that with our relationships. 1 minute you hate him, 1 minute you love him.
Oh, I love it. Well, to bring everything full circle, and we talked about how there was a book released first, and once again, we read through that, and then there's a movie released, and a person from the outside perspective watches and they go, some of this has to be made up, some of it has to be fabricated. And I've heard you say, as crazy as it is, most of it is pretty factually accurate and true. So
It's
talk about,
accurate.
yeah, talk about some of those stories, that we see of, a ship going down and we're leaving in, the
Yes,
water, or
yes,
in an
that's all.
airplane, things like
Like,
that.
yeah, the ship was accurate. That was a very, very scary moment in my life. I thought I was dead for sure, and we did have to get hoisted 40 feet up
Yeah.
into a helicopter. Yeah, a lot of it, a lot of the crazy stuff is very true, and that's why I do a fact or fiction. I haven't done one in a while, but people love those on my social media because they're like, did that really happen? Like the scene in the nursery. I know everybody's disappointed. That did not really happen. I'm sorry, guys. But like the scene, the great funny scene of him leaving the country club. Now, we don't know if he left the country club like that because nobody was there to witness it, but the car did come home crashed. And
So
I had,
somewhere along the way, we were hitting things.
yeah. So a lot of it is very true. Because
Now,
remember, it's Jordan's life and Jordan wrote the book, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Now, after once again, we see the scene, and you're not living in it, so you're kind of like, this is comical, whatever. But being the spouse, on the flip side of that, I mean, is it just is it that is it just you roll your eyes and say, well, we'll buy a new one, or is it like, all right, what are we doing here, and having like this sit down and drag out conversation?
yeah, that night I couldn't even have one because he was not in his right mind. So when I saw the
Yeah.
car, like we were just like, okay, let's just put him to bed. But that was really my life with him. I always said I had a bumper sticker that said I had my angels on the run.
Yeah.
because I was just kind of really like holding on to his coattails, for dear life. And I always say it was like a merry-go-round of insanity.
Yeah.
Just never knew what was going to happen moment to moment.
Now, from, the outside perspective, once again, very charismatic gentleman, right? Jordan's a very charismatic person. And you quickly can see how people would want to follow, be around. And I guess just from your standpoint, seeing really the growth of the business, right? I mean, it grew significantly over time. What was that like on your side, just seeing the growth and change within the business from the origination of your relationship to where it was by the end of it?
Do you mean his business?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, he, what the thing about Jordan that's kind of amazing is he's the comeback king, right? I mean, he's very bright, he's very disciplined, he's very driven. So, and I think everybody knows this in business, it has ups and downs. And I think he's been able to ride the ups and downs very well,
Yeah.
right? Like come out of jail, write a book in jail, get a book, get a movie, and now he's another, he's doing tons of business deals everywhere, right?
Yep.
So he's in his heart, I think, a true businessman. And and I'm happy for him and his success again.
Yeah.
We share two beautiful children, we share a grandchild. Um, and somebody becomes your family once you have children with them. And so you have to figure out a way to be reasonable and make it work, at least if you can. Not everybody can in these situations. And I
Yep.
understand that. For us, we were very lucky and we could.
Yeah. Well, and you said that, you said, hey, there's been a great co-parenting dynamic and relationship there to give our kids, the best we can from both perspectives.
Yes, yes. And it's worked for us. That doesn't mean again, it hasn't been bumpy. Jordan and I are two very opinionated, feisty people. I don't know if I'm quite as strong-willed as he is, but we've had our disagreements, but we've always come together for our children.
I love it. Well, Dr. Nadine, I appreciate you and your time and sharing your
Thank
story.
you.
Everyone, go get her book, Run Like Hell. And any last words or things you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think that when things are going wrong in life and you just feel hopeless, right? To just know that that's a normal part of life. Every
Hmm.
single person on the planet feels like that.
Yeah.
And that give yourself space to feel those feelings, get them all out, then pick yourself up, reach out to a friend, reach out to a therapist, go for a walk, do some exercise, and life goes on. And we can all grow and learn from our mistakes. I make mistakes every single day. I just made a whopper of a mistake this week that's torturing me inside. And you know what? That's life. Because if you make mistakes, it just shows you're trying.
Yep. Face them, surround yourself with great people, have a great therapist, and work your way through it, right?
Work your way through it. Yep. And that just means you're trying. So just keep going.
I love it. Well, Dr. Nadine, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.